people, like, we were always taught, like, not just, you know, being fundamentalist Christians or everything, and living in the society, that it's considered rude to talk about politics. So talking about your religion, about your politics, about how much money you make and your love life. And so we've been conditioned to grow up and leave politics alone. And I think that's nonsense. I think it's ridiculous, because everything about your life is political. I say this all the time, you know, but your bank is political, your landlord is political, your police chief is political. Sexism and racism, it's all political. Everything that has a direct influence on your life, every person who has direct influence on your life, that person is political. So yeah, I'm going to talk about it. I am, because like, you'd have to avoid literally every single subject. But yeah, and so, but it's such a great point about how there are divergent theologies or practices or views or cultures within the Christian movement in the United States. But when it comes to politics, all of a sudden, there's a whole lot of agreement, and we can look the other way on things. And I brought up the Christian school part because for a long time, I have been trying to do a series on the history books from Christian schools. And I did a whole thing about Robert E. Lee and about the Confederacy and how they're venerated and how they're praised, and how, as a kid, we were taught these were great men, these were Christians, and they've been painted the wrong. And that's why you have millions of people who will march in the streets, to defend Robert E. Lee, a slave owner who loved slaves, who killed Americans to protect slavery. And just saying that is offensive to some people. No, that's actual history. And that's why I try to point to at least that certain sect of the Christian movement, because the damage is done to not just politics, but to, you know, the national conversation in general. I think it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, I don't feel any reticence going guns blazing against ideas at all, and against, you know, especially figureheads. And like, that's the thing, is like, I've gotten to a point now, I understand the difference between a Jack Hyles, who I think understood exactly what he was doing and was very manipulative and purposeful, and the guy that is well-intentioned, that went to his college and learned how to be abusive and thought that was like God's way, you know? So like, there's two different types of people in my mind. But when it comes to the people listening, like, the concerning thing to me is not so much like the overtly sinister people. I think it's the people that are extremely misinformed, because I was one of them. And so I try to think in my content, would I, you know, am I thinking about this in terms of understanding, recognizing where I came from, and what are the steps I could give to myself then to lead myself out? How could I be the, you know, the stuff fundies like for the next Eric, you know, that's growing up right now, to the people that will never find that website, you know, like, how can I be the person that they can sneak a podcast episode and get a grasp on what they're actually in? And so I have a lot of empathy for a lot of people that are extremely misguided, because I was numero uno in that regard.
Yeah. When it comes to people who are involved in this cult, that's a great point. There are two types of people. I think Aaron Ra, I heard him say this. There's two types of these Christians. There are the deceivers, and there are the deceived. There is no third category. That is it. You can be one or both, but there's no chance that you're neither. You fit into one of them in some way or the other. And I always say that I kind of consider myself an anti-missionary whenever I first started on this. Kayla can tell you this, that before I started doing any videos or broadcasting or anything like that, I was just really annoying on Facebook. That's really what I did. Go ahead, you guys something to say, Kayla? Got something to add? Oh, I can't hear you, Kayla. Oh, you're muted. Kayla, you're muted.
Oh.
Technical difficulties.
There we go.
Hear me?
There we go. You're
okay,
back.
sorry, everything was frozen. I was just going to say, yeah, super annoying, like very, very. Just would not stop.
That was worth the wait.
Like, broski, if you thought about a podcast, you can just say it all.
Well, I was in the Army at the time, so I wasn't comfortable doing it then. But anyway, yeah, I started off being very.
I'm just kidding. You were knowledgeable, though. You were spitting some facts.
You're goddamn right. Yeah. And so, yeah, I was just very annoying on Facebook. But, you know, getting that information out, what wasn't very important to me, because I don't know about, well, actually, I got to ask a little bit more about that, because you touched on, you know, your spiritual journey, Eric. I want to get to that. But I lost my faith, I don't know, a little bit after college, honestly. And when it happened, I felt really hurt. I was hurt and I was lost. God was real as the ground I was standing on. I felt like I lost a limb. It was one of the most horrible moments of my life. And after going through that pain, then I just started feeling hurt and betrayed because I spent so much time talking to clergy members, to instructors, to pastors, deacons, like people who supposedly knew better, and easily stumped. Easily, like with third grade questions that I had just accepted the answer to. And then when they get pressed on them, it turns out they don't have anything for me. And say, oh, okay, so you guys knew that this path led to nowhere and you're just believing this on fairy dust. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try to let everyone know, hey, this is the truth right here. You may not like how I present it. You probably will because I'm hilarious, but this is just how it's going to be. And I kind of saw myself in a way that I'm going to help these folks. I'm going to lead them away and say, you don't have to be this way. You don't have to believe in this. You can be better. And over the years, I just kind of realized that that's kind of a bad way to go about it, because if people want to learn more, they'll just ask you, right? You don't have to like try to.
You don't have to insult them first. This just in.
Yeah, it turns out you don't have to. But look, some people like it. They like it. They enjoy. Look, if you can insult people all you want as long as it's funny. Have you ever had Eric? Have you ever had someone insult? It's true. Well, check this out. Have you ever had someone insult you, but even you thought the insult was funny and you laughed anyway? When that happens, it's hard to be mad. It's actually really hard to be upset. Like if someone is making you laugh, like humor is incredibly disarming.
It hurts me deeply. I don't know. Maybe I'm different.
I'm suddenly thinking about Jake Paul thanking Mike Tyson for slapping him last night, and it feels like the same thing all of a sudden.
Well, I don't know. In my experience, it works pretty well. But I was just I wanted to lead people away and like be an anti-missionary on this, but over the years, I learned that there's more effective ways to do it, that people will reach out to you and then they can contact you. How did you handle Eric, if you could tell us, like you mentioned that when you started the show, you still were a believer, I believe you said. Yeah. And then every time you did the show after that, it got a little bit more difficult. Where did you end up? Like, what would you call yourself exactly?
I don't know. I mean, it's cliche. It's like the most cliche thing to be like, I don't like labels, I mean, on paper, I would say I'm a agnostic, at this point. I mean, whatever you want to call me. I don't really care. Atheist, agnostic. Like I just got to a point where I was like, there is no indication of anything supernaturally different about this thing versus all the other movements we talk about. And, for all the talk of the Holy Spirit and, being a new creature and, it's like, it's exactly the same. And the results of the change people experience, I don't negate. Like there are people who join churches and their life radically transforms.
Yep.
There are people that join Alcoholics Anonymous whose lives radically transform. I think there's people that convert to, be Buddhist and their lives, right? Like, I think I find belief to be a lot like diets, where it's like, if you find a worldview and stick to it, you're going to have a lot of things that probably do drastically improve because you're sticking to some system instead of going day to day, bouncing around from one thing to another. So all that to say, like, yeah, when I started the show, though, I was coming from a place of like, I'm going to help reform this to what it could be. And, I think this will change. And I very quickly realized, like, nobody wants that. They're really pissed that I want them to want that. And, the few that I would encounter who were like, oh, they're different. Like next thing I know, they were leaving their church or they were getting kicked out of their churches in worse situations. And it was like, the church doesn't seem to be welcoming any of the people that actually exemplify what I found Christ to be, during that time period. And then, as I got further in, it was just like I said, I didn't wake up with my default operating system going like, there is a God and you're doing everything for this purpose. Like that just disappeared, and I definitely think the types of stories I was listening to and consuming, I definitely think that the realities I was seeing impacted that, but I don't think it was just a situation of like, oh, I heard some sad stories and now I don't want to be part of this. It was a lot deeper than that, and then add all my personal experiences and, life in the religion myself. It was just like, what am I doing? Like, why am I forcing myself to fit into this mold at this point?
Yeah. Felt that. Something that we I just want to know if you've ever observed, because obviously I think you're on like what, episode 338 of Preacher
that's a
Boy?
very
If I
specific number,
knew that, I'll be impressed. I know it's over 300. So just a little moment to shout you out there for it, because that's epic. But one thing that we identified when we first sat down, we being TJ and then our third original co-host Kai, we feel like we found this like trend around the IFB churches around military installations, because us in particular, we're all a little bit military brats. Have you ever observed anything like that? Or okay.
This is my favorite talking point that I've never talked about on the show, and I talk about it so much, and people always go like, "You're so dumb. This isn't true." So when I first of all, my grandparents ran a Christian coffee shop on a military base that was like a ministry for people that were in the armed services, and then our church had a lot of missionaries who supported that were like their mission field was the military. And then when I was doing media production for churches, I would go to Hawaii pretty often to shoot promo videos, and most of the people in the churches were in the military because they would, they were stationed there. So like anybody that wasn't local was pretty much either really wealthy business person that was retiring there or working remotely there, or military. My theory has always been that the reason that the IFB is so drawn to that group is because they are so used to following very rigid rules and guidelines. And I feel like they found really easy prey in that realm. And also, let's face it, I think churches in general like reaching parts of the population that are experiencing really heavy traumatic things. It makes it really easy to get someone to sign up for your specific religion. So I always felt like there was a real emphasis on the military. And I think even people that are like shaking their heads right now to it, who are listening, like, think about how many IFB churches did like armed services days and local law enforcement days. Like, I specifically think there was a real push for that. And I would love for there to be like some real study into like the church and the military, like, and I think there's a lot of other layers to that too. I'm sure there's like funding that happens with chaplains, and I'm sure that there's, a lot of pieces to that puzzle that would fall into place. But yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up.
We agree here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I especially feel like though the fact that there's so many people in the military that are drawn to IFB churches. Like, I know a lot of people that were former military. I think the guys that really went for the rigid, like rule following to the T, the super short hair, like the people that were obvious military, like they like felt right at home in these environments. And I think there's a correlation there as well. Of like, I can immediately just become pliable and part of your, your kind of orbit. But I'm not from the military too, so I also don't want to step on any, toes for anybody that is and make too many assumptions. But I've just seen it. I've observed it and have my own theories about it.
No, this is something that we were talking, like, I think it was actually before we even had the show. I just had Kayla and Kai on as guests, and we were talking about this. And one of the two of it was you, Kayla, said that, hey, did you guys ever? It was you, yeah. You guys ever notice how often these churches pop up around military institutions or installations? And I couldn't believe I never caught the correlation, because when I started thinking about it, that's how my family got involved. We started attending Rhineland Baptist Church in Kinsbach, Germany, right outside the military base where my dad was stationed. We moved to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and that's where Kayla and I went to school. And there was a church right outside that military institution. And when I started thinking about it, you saw it all the time. And Eric, you mentioned how often you'll see these churches with military-specific ministries. There was a church I went to, Tabernacle Baptist Church in Lebanon, Missouri, and every Sunday, it was called the Free Day Away program. And what they would do is they would send a couple of buses about an hour away to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and they would pick up a bunch of trainees and and they would take the trainees back to the church, and they would spend all Sunday morning, and then they would spend Sunday afternoon playing basketball, playing pool, having fun, getting free food, just chumming it up with all these soldiers.
these are just for context. Like Fort Leonard Wood has a basic training camp there. Like we're probably young men, like 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds away from their family.
Yep.
Scared, vulnerable,
begging
missing home.
Yeah,
just to do.
Yeah, desperate for some fun at all. And you give them all the fun they want, and then you bring them in for a fire and brimstone sermon, the same one every Sunday night, and see if they'll accept Christ. I remember that. I went to so many of those sermons back on those days. And then I started thinking about the culture itself and how many, like Christian metaphors and statements they have. You guys remember singing, "I'm in the Lord's army" as a kid, "Onward, Christian soldiers, put on the full armor of God." It's everywhere. Like the militarism is just it. You would be a bad, fundamentalist if you didn't understand the correlation there. Yeah. It's very powerful and it works really well.
The emphasis on hierarchy. I said, I just told Eric before this that I wasn't going to talk about Hurricane Helene, but I'm going to bring it up right now. Since the hurricane out here in Western North Carolina, one thing that everyone keeps talking about is seeing people come together. And I've gotten to watch, I think, and this is a thought that has occurred to me so many times as I'm watching these volunteer hubs and places that are working really well and getting recovery efforts that are functioning well. They're all really linear, leadership kind of situations, letting volunteers come in and do what they know to do. And I almost kind of wanted to work against it at first. I was like, we have to have a leader. There has to be, and then I had to pause and realize that was, could have come from either side, maybe being a military kid, but I really feel like it was driven home in my home and church settings that it comes back to the purity culture stuff and how do you create that hierarchy where these situations that we've talked about you talked about on your podcast, we talked about here, how do you become desensitized, or how does the progression look like? And it has something to do with that hierarchy as well. I'm not saying that the military can't function with that. But it's easy to go back and forth between those two.